I wanted to ask you a bit about your work in prisons.
Oh.
How did it start?
So it started, so I'd come back from overseas and lost my job at the New York Times for denouncing the war in Iraq, given a formal written reprimand, told I couldn't speak about it. This is classic. We had another reporter, John Burns, who was cheering on the war in Iraq. They didn't give him a reprimand, so it wasn't...
He was also involved in the New York Times dealings with Julian.
Was he?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Burns was cheerleading the war and I was denouncing it. So it wasn't a matter of speaking out about the war, it was just speaking about the war and saying the wrong thing. So I was finally told I couldn't speak publicly and I left the paper. And I kind of I wrote my first book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, which I didn't expect anyone to read. It was kind of about the culture of war, and it wasn't autobiographical and it wasn't even sequential, but it was about the culture of war, what it's like, and I've covered, at least a half dozen conflicts in depth. And I was teaching at Princeton and I was living in Princeton. I was teaching at the university, and a friend of mine who was the head of the history department of the College of New Jersey was going into the prison and teaching college courses to people who had their high school equivalency, what we call the GED. Now, it didn't have academic validity, and she bought the books, and that's how I started, because of her. And then I loved it. I mean, and then in 2013, Rutgers started a college degree program, and I started teaching in that. And these are serious students who have turned their cells into libraries, who never had a chance, and that space in a prison classroom is really sacred because you're given agency. It's the only time in the day you're given agency. You're treated with respect. I mean, really, sacred is the only way to describe it. And so, I've been teaching since 2010, and now I think I've tried to count, I've sent about 600 students, and a lot of my students are getting out. I help my students write a play, which was my book. Our class was about that process. And your mother's a theater director, your brother's an actor, my wife is an actor. And when I started, it was kind of clueless. I was teaching drama. I was teaching August Wilson, all these great playwrights, Baldwin and others. But I realized from the first day they hadn't seen any theater because they don't have money to go see theater.
Right.
Unlike in the old days in Europe where they used to subsidize. Even when I lived in Zagreb, I could buy a ticket for $10 to go see great opera, and they were all state employees. And so whatever you say about communism, they supported the arts and a great education. I mean, you could get through Charles University. And so I said, okay, well, why don't you just I wanted them to write in dramatic dialogue because that's how emotions and information, everything is conveyed. And it turns out that one of my students had knew who I was and had recruited the best writers in the prison. So I start reading through this stuff and I'm going, wow. I mean, I had 4 or 5 really powerfully written. And so I said to my wife, I think I'm going to try and help them write a play. Not that I know anything about writing a play. And then it just unraveled. I mean, because in a prison, you don't even tell your cellmate anything about yourself, because when you express vulnerability, then the predators come for you. Right. And guys would get up and they started writing these scenes of their lives. And some of them couldn't read them, or they'd stand up and their hands were shaking and they were crying. It was really powerful. And because it inadvertently and organically became, their grief, their loss, all of that was expressed in a group of 28. And then eventually, when I first asked, I said, who wants parts? Who wants a part? Only 7 people wanted parts of the 28. But as we started writing all 28, so I had to write 28. I was editing it, they were writing it, but I had to write 28 parts. I mean, it was like a Fabian tract, and then we had a reading, and we couldn't produce it because there was stuff in there that would anger the guards. And so I brought in Cornel West and the great theologian James Cone to hear it. But when we got to the lobby, the warden was there and he said, you're not going to your classroom. and they hauled us into the chapel, and there was a phalanx of guards, all white at the back. And then they brought my class in. And of course, they had to immediately decide which parts of the play they could read out loud and which they couldn't. And they all huddled, like in a big circle. And I wanted to hear what they were editing out. But I purposely walked all the way to the back of the room because I said, it's theirs. It's their play. And you can't replicate that power. However, they weren't trained actors or anything, but it all came from here. And then my best writer, thank God, got out first. I met him at the gate. And we worked with a great director, Jeff Wise in New York, who workshopped it. And we had to reduce those parts back to 7 parts. And then it was produced by the theater in Trenton, New Jersey, and was sold out every night for a month. And then we had one night for the families. And that was, an amazing experience. So all of these families, some of whom had driven hours to get there. And about 4 months into the play, I hear people begin to cry. And they just wept through the whole play. And so I wrote this book, Our Class, that used that process of writing the play to talk about mass incarceration, because every scene in that play happened to someone in that classroom, including stuff that would just seem improbable, like the guy who, his first night in Trenton, which is the high security prison in New Jersey, the guard comes, he goes, that was your father's cell. Yeah, stuff like you can, Jesus. Yeah. Or I said once to I said, okay, we were working on scenes. I said, we need to get a dialogue between the son and the mother. And then a student comes up to me after class and goes, well, what if we're a product of rape? And I said, well, that's what you got to write, Timmy. So he couldn't read it, actually. And it was written into the play. And when we produced the play and he did read it, he immediately went off stage. And I said, where's Timmy? Where's Timmy? And I found him in the corner of the bathroom just shaking and sobbing. And the dialogue that he wrote, which was from his own experience, was he was a product of rape. And he was with his half-brother in a car. And there was a weapon in the car. And the car was searched by the police. And it was his half-brother's weapon. And he said, it's mine. And what he wrote was the phone call from the county jail to his mother, which said, it doesn't matter, Ma. I was never supposed to be here anyway. And you have the son you love. That's why he went to prison.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So it was, still even though I wrote the book, I pick it up and it kind of rips my heart out. Wow. So I'm really committed, and they're amazing guys. They remind me of war correspondents, actually. I don't really like liberals too much. When I went to divinity school at Harvard, I lived in the inner city in Roxbury and I used to commute into Cambridge to go to school. I said, that is where I learned to hate liberals. All the people who, talk about empowering people they never met. So now they're getting out, a lot of them, and they're brilliant. I've got, several graduated summa cum laude from Rutgers, and they're tough and they're real, fiercely loyal. War correspondents are kind of rogues in many ways, but you earn your way into that fraternity by always watching the back of the person you're with. I can remember being in ambushes and every fiber in my body wanted to run. It's terrifying, it's scary, but you can't until everyone goes out. And they have that kind of loyalty. Yeah. So now I'm getting back and going to court. As they get out, because it's so hard to get work, and you just get, involved in their lives, and I know their mothers and their kids, and so.
So was this a specific prison with a management that thought this was a good idea, or?
No, that's interesting. So the prison rights advocates organized to pass a law in New Jersey that said that if secondary education was provided, the prisons had to create a space for it. And so Rutgers, they raise several $1 million a year, but it's actually an entity within Rutgers, but it's not Rutgers. So at the beginning, the guards treated us really poorly because they were baiting us. They would treat us, just horrific stuff. Like when, the guards bring in the drugs, then there are overdoses, then the Special Investigation Division comes in and tries to find out who. So one night I'm sitting there with a bunch of other Rutgers professors, and we go into the rotunda at East Jersey State Prison, and the rotunda is completely surrounded by bars. And suddenly these guards come to us. Now we're all teachers, up against the bars, up against the bars. We all have to stand on the bars. We're patted down and searched. Then they bring the dogs to sniff us. And then they go, all right, get out. You're not teaching tonight. So that's like classic. And of course, what happens is most professors don't come back. That's what they want. Very hard to retain professors. And they can be but you can't respond, because if you say one thing, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, then they write it up and you don't come back.
Yes.
And so they could be really, it's better now, and I think it's better because in the prison that I just taught in, we have 140 people out of 2,000 in the college degree program. It's really hard to get in. And if you have a lot of charges, i.e. if your disciplinary record is not good, you can't get in. So I think we had, for the 140, 600 or 700 applications, but it means that the behaviors in the prisons are modified because people want to get into the program. That's my guess.
Right.
So they're not as, and then you've got the class issue, because the guards didn't go to college, and they're going, why do these people get free? I mean, it's a legitimate question. I mean, so, and then the other factor you've got is that most of these people, a lot of the guards were in Iraq and Afghanistan, so they've got very bad PTSD. And I'll pull in there, and they're all coming in their pickup trucks and totally pumped up, probably on steroids.
Yeah.
And it's a job like cops where you can be paid very well to be a sadist. I mean, nobody's gonna.
The vocational ones.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's for people who haven't been in that kind of environment, it's very difficult to understand the kind of dynamic that develops very quickly. Because I think maybe the first or second time you go in there, and you kind of, you want to stand your ground on all sorts of small things.
That's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea, and you notice people who are new, coming into the prison. You're like, just run with it, because first of all, it's a little fiefdom, right?
It's a totalitarian system. I mean, completely.
And they control everything. I mean, literally everything.
On a whim too.
Yes.
It's a whim. There's no rule. They just feel like it, they do it.
Exactly. So you have to play along. You have to make compromises in order to, and pick your battles. Because I mean, at times I've tweeted about things that have happened in the prison, but maybe one time out of every 6, because I have to do that calculation.
Yeah, that's right.
I was just in Rome. I don't know if you know. I
saw
had
the Pope.
Yes, I saw the Pope in a private audience, and I gave.
You speak Spanish too, right?
Yes.
You speak Spanish? Right?
We spoke Spanish.
Except he speaks Argentine Spanish. That's all right.
And I was thinking, I want to give him a gift, but what gift do you give the Pope? And so the gift that I ended up giving was 2 printouts of the famous wedding pictures.
Oh, that's nice.
Because, as you know, I mean, you were meant to be there. You were meant to be a witness.
Just as outside.
Yes, you were outside the
listening to
prison
Craig
walls.
Murray.
Well, one of the objections they had to having you as a witness was that you were a journalist.
I know.
Well,
they didn't let your photographer in there.
Exactly. So the prison took the pictures. Prison guard, who's the same prison guard that does the pictures for cell raids. And Julian and I sort of joked that our wedding pictures would look like a cell raid, and they kind of do. So we haven't actually been given the digital files. We've been given, both Julian and I each, printed out copies of the wedding in A4, like porous, not photographic paper. And that's what I have, right? I just have that one copy. Supposedly the prison is retaining the digital copy. We got Julian's solicitor to write to the prison, and they said yes, they would retain.
But that's
it.
classic prison behavior. I mean, it's just, they just invent like obstacles that have because they like to do it. I guess I don't know.
Well, the thing is, they said we weren't allowed to bring the photographer in because it was a security issue. But then they chose a location. The location had to be a room with nothing on the wall, like a blank
As
wall.
opposed to the chapel.
As opposed to the chapel. And then, so they had total control over, the only thing in the picture is Julian and me in our wedding clothes. That's it. So anyway, this is also a security risk. So when they sent the picture, so when they sent the pictures to me, they also sent what they call a compact, which is just this form, and asked me to sign it. I haven't signed it, but saying, here are your pictures. You're not allowed to share this on social media, and you're not allowed to share it with the press. And so they're censored wedding pictures.
Wow.
And I got asked because I wrote a tweet saying that I had given these pictures and that bizarrely the prison hasn't allowed me to share it with the press or on social media. And then I was reading the comments and they said, well, why don't you do it anyway? And that's I mean, it's a logical question, but it's also if your loved one, if someone is inside the prison, they're exposed to all sorts of difficulty.
They're exposed to retribution, and they're always looking for ways to keep you out.
Right.
So I have, unfortunately, I mean, do you know the old character from the movies in America, Step and Fetch It from the 30s? It's this horrible black stereotype, where Step and Fetch It, he's every black stereotype racist stereotype you could want, where he doesn't want to work and he's completely obsequious to white people and awful. But that's what I feel like in the prison. And it's not my nature and it's not yours, but you got to swallow it because I got to get in there for my students. And I know they're looking. Like, I'm not allowed to have any email contact, any phone contact, any written contact with any of my students in the prison. And I don't violate that rule because they monitor it. And I know the first time I would send an email, that's a hard and fast rule. And they don't like me there. I mean, they've tried twice not to give me credentials. Fortunately, I mean, one of the times I was teaching at the University of Princeton, and I got the president to call the commissioner. So, I mean, I could play that white privilege power game that got me back in, but they don't like me in there.
Yeah.
So that's what people don't get. Yeah, and I think the other thing that people don't get is that when you have someone you love in prison, to a certain extent, your family is incarcerated as well.
Yes.
I mean, that's hard to describe to people, but just the fact your children have to go to a prison, they have to see that. What mother wants their children to see that naked face of the police state? I mean, and then you ask questions, and then there's, of course, one of the reasons I'm so fiercely against mass incarceration is what it does to families. And in the States, they jack up, it's all privatized. I don't know if it's like the same here. So the phone rates are really high.
Yes.
And so and the only way that an incarcerated parent can communicate with their children is over the phone. And they're gouging them. I mean, we're talking about the poorest of the poor. I mean, people really struggling, and it's $15 for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And the people who run this, I just did a protest at Princeton Theological Seminary because the owner or the guy who owns, it used to be Global Tellink, and they've said, of the prison phones, who's worth, I don't know, $10 billion. I'm not making that up. I mean, he's the chairman of the trustee board of the seminary. Yeah. And so, again, it gets into how corrupt how wedded the institutions are. So there's just, and you have to pay in advance. I mean, it's,
right. Yeah. No,
it's so awful. And there's so many little things like that. I'm talking about the people who live outside that become so burdensome and stressful, which you're going through, that if you're not connected to the prison system, you don't get it. It's not just the person who's locked up. In a way, you've locked up the whole family.
Yeah. Well, our kids only ever get an hour and a bit with Julian. And there's something called family day, which we've never experienced because Julian is never on the list of favorite prisoners.
Oh, you have to be selected for family day?
You have to be selected for family day. So, and family day is, I think, 5 hours, and you can watch a movie or something. I don't know. I've only ever heard it's like it's some I hear it's real, but we're never
No, but you're
eligible.
still within the walls of the prison. I mean, so
Yeah.
when visiting hours would come, and we actually had a riot in the prison I taught because one guy was with his kids and the guard came and started harassing and insulting him in front of his children.
Right.
And he got up and he said out loud to the other prisoners, "This guy is disrespecting me in front of my kids." There was a riot. Everyone started fighting. But what they do in that prison is that, you know, they stop the visit and you got to move immediately. And they put all of the prisoners on one side and they put all of the families, including the children, on the other. And then they pull a curtain like this. And then it's strip searched. All the men are strip searched. And that in and of itself, and that's why, and then they will also harass the families who come to visit. So you can wait for hours. There's no bathroom. If you wait, you're often outside in the rain. There's no protection from the rain.
Right.
Then the guards, so a lot of my students tell their mothers don't come because they are so upset and they're powerless at seeing their mothers disrespected by the guards that I mean, that's very common. They say, just don't come, don't. And then people who have long sentences, the first thing they do is they get the paralegals to write out the divorce papers. I mean, it's just, you know, I say, if you don't walk out of that prison system angry, you don't have a heart. You know, people say, what keeps you going? I said, well, how can I walk out of that classroom and I walk out? They don't.
Yeah.
But and Julian's detention conditions are probably even worse. I mean, they are worse, I think, than my students. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, you know, what you're doing is torturing, solitary confinement. I had a student, he had a cell phone sold to him by a guard. They catch it and they throw him in solitary for a year. I mean, he graduated summa cum laude. He's out now. He's working as a community organizer. But if you go back to that year, he's never gotten over that trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we know from just, you know, studies, 6 days in solitary confinement will start to really mess your head up. So these are systems designed to torture, which is, of course, what they're doing to Julian. But it's not just Julian. I think Julian probably gets it worse than they do. In the supermax prisons, though, they won't put the college degree program in the supermax prison in the state of New Jersey because, in the words of the warden, it's a waste of time because they're all going to die in here anyway. That's a quote. Wow. So I was just buying the books and going in and teaching a course like I had done before, the college program. And I taught, you know, these things like teaching Shakespeare in prison. Then all these academics write books about how it changed their lives. Well, I've taught Shakespeare in prison, and it's good for them, but it didn't change their life. I think they couldn't wait to finish. But I did. I taught Lear, a close read of Lear. Well,
Okay.
that was a whole course, line by line. And I wish I'd taped it because I'd have them do summaries, you know, of like, so yeah, Lear, he's got like his posse and like his two bitches, and you know, it was hilarious, you know, it was hilarious. But we got to Gloucester's suicide, and it turns out a third of my class had tried to kill themselves. A third. And that's supermax. I mean, there's no rec time, they can't lift weights, they will go 4 or 5 days without getting out to the yard.
Yeah.
It's and the mood in that prison or that classroom is unlike any other. I teach mostly in maximum security prisons, supermax. It's unlike any. And of course, Julian's held under these, you know, same kind of conditions. I mean, he eats in his cell, right? He doesn't.
Yes.
He eats in his cell.
Yeah. And these things become kind of, it's very disturbing how this, I think as you're exposed to it and as time goes by, you see, I saw this in myself. I kind of had this moment of objectivity at one point when we were getting our, what's it called, the bureaucratic step you have to do before getting married. You get the registrar to come, and so the registrar came to the prison, had to have us both present and so on. So this was in a different room to where we usually meet, which is this big hall. It was where the legal meetings take place, and they're small small rooms with a table and some chairs. And I came out of this meeting feeling so fortunate for having spent an hour and a half with Julian in a different space. And it's very disturbing how you kind of assimilate the restrictions. And normal was in the visits hall, and just being with Julian in this different room was, I felt like I had been really fortunate.
Well, that's what prison does.
Yeah.
It reduces you. Well, I mean, look, it's a form. It's bondage. It's a form of slavery, really.
Yeah.
And it reduces you to rejoicing in these, in the, you know, in the broader context, insignificant privileges that the master grants you.
Yes. Yes. Have you tried to get into, or have you been in ADX Florence?
No, it's really hard to get in.
Okay. So this is a prison that Julian will likely be taken to if he's...
Yeah, I mean, so I've been in Marion to visit Daniel Hale, and he's in the MCU, which replicates, if Julian's extradited, the conditions he'll be held under. And yeah, I mean, it's like when I was visiting with Daniel, so I couldn't, it was behind plexiglass. And let's remember, this is a guy who never committed a violent crime in his life, like Julian, ever, you know, and so it was me and him talking, and the guards were recording, and I could hear in the other room, because they turned the volume up, I could hear our conversation, being recorded, that they were playing. And that, of course, is, you know, Baritza's a pretty repugnant figure, but she did recognize the savagery of the American prison system, to her credit.
Yes.
And it is savage, having been in it. And it's really savage, yeah. So.
Has any documentary crew followed you into the prison?
They won't allow it. There's no electronics in the prison. You can't do that.
Well, not in Belmarsh either, but then you have some TV programs about Belmarsh that make Belmarsh look good.
Or what my students hate is these shows like Real Prison or whatever it's called, where they're all animals, you know? So you can get TV, but, you know, they're not going to film 2 hours of us discussing James Baldwin. That make really good TV. And that's what all my experience in prison is.
Yeah.
And so I love this. I love those students, and they come to my house now, and you know, they're just amazing human beings. And I spend a lot of time trying to get them jobs, and which is hard. But they're really remarkable. I mean, to end up where they have ended up. I mean, very few of us could have gone through what they went through and ended up where they end up.
Right.
They are really remarkable people. Yeah, no, they won't allow it. I mean, I'm in there by sufferance because they don't want the publicity, which I would, of course, generate if they threw me out.
Right.
And I have heard anecdotally that the governor said, I don't want to deal with it, so just give them the clearance. But yeah, no, they're amazing human beings. I mean, and you know, August Wilson writes about it. So does Solzhenitsyn. You know, the finest people. I'm sure Julian says that. Some of the finest people he's met are in prison. And there was that. Remember, there was in the prison that act of solidarity on the part of the prisoners on Julian's behalf. I can't remember the details. It was.
Yes, I mean, Julian, when he was arrested, he spent a few weeks in the general population, and then he was taken to the health care wing. Well,
Hell wing,
Hell
what do they call it?
Yeah. It's a misnomer. And he was there for 6 months, and this was the hardest period because the prison had the the reasoning from the prison was that he was a severe suicide risk. They had found him that he had hidden a razor in his cell, and he was kept in this health wing for 6 months. And you can just imagine in a prison like Belmarsh, where you have about 750 prisoners, the health wing is maybe a dozen little, probably about a dozen prisoners. You have the acutely suicidal, the prisoners who are dying, and then people who are having some kind of mental health episode, and that's who you find there. So, and they're kept in isolation from each other. So when he would be let into the yard, that's who he would find, and he was extremely, isolated during that period. And he also couldn't make many phone calls, so it was the prisoners who worked as cleaners in that section who observed Julian's state and put in a petition to the governor to ask for him to be moved into the general population. And eventually that worked. And the terrible period in the health wing, it's been bad with COVID and so on. For 6 months I couldn't visit him. There were periods where he was, in solitary, with this health reasoning. There was an outbreak in his wing, about 70% of prisoners. This was even, early on in the pandemic. But it was never as bad as it was when he was in this health wing. And it was thanks to these prisoners that he got moved. And there is that kind of thing in the prison. But it's not, Belmarsh is a harsh prison. They keep people isolated a lot of the time. As you said, you eat in your cell. Sometimes you have association within the wing, which is an hour where you can move in the corridor and speak to other prisoners. But they prefer it not to be that way, because from the perspective of an underfunded prison management, the more you have prisoners interacting, the more risk you have of some incident. And so the incentives are just to keep people inside their cells. And of course, that in itself carries all sorts of consequences.
Oh, it makes their job
right?
easier. I mean, so, when I was teaching in Trenton, I would post the class. And I did this, 3 or 4 times, and then the prison called and said, "Oh, we posted your class, nobody wants to take it." And the social worker at some risk called and said they never posted your class.
Right, sure.
Because they don't want the movement, they don't want to deal with it. It's keep them locked up for 23 hours a day. It's easier.
Yeah.
And that's always the push in the prisons, because any kind of social interaction or an education program requires more work, and they don't want to do it. Yeah.
Well, it's all people are used to seeing these prison break and these TV programs where everyone's in this mess, like mess. Do you call it?
Mess hall, yeah.
Mess hall.
Mess.
People interacting, and for most of the time, it's nothing like that. At least in Belmarsh. It's the exception to the rule is that you're out of your
cell. In a supermax prison, you don't get that. In a maximum security prison, you will get a mess and a yard and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
You have sections of the prison, management control units, or what they call the hole, where it's just isolation. So you have sections in the prison where people are under those conditions. But yeah, we did. But he's of course held in a very high security prison, so that's typical for how they operate. And it really the the end is to keep them locked in their cells almost all the time. That's how they cope with it. Yeah. And I don't know, what does he get, 23 hours a day in the cell? What's he?
Yes, sometimes it's 22.
Okay.
You can leave your cell to collect medication, to go to the shower. You have to be able to leave at certain times. But they knock on the door and they say, "Do you want a shower?" And then you come out. It's not like you can open the door. And yeah. Well,
I have a question for you. So I asked John. I loved Ithaca, but I really loved Ithaca because John didn't answer any question they asked him. I love John. I think it's great, but every time they'd ask him a question, it was completely elliptical. It was like so great. It was so funny. He's a wonderful guy. But I was here, the night of your wedding, and I said to John something about, I don't know, it came up because I don't know if John's religious or comes out of a religious tradition, but I do, and I sense he has a kind of. I said something about Julian being an atheist. He goes, "Well, I don't know, So I wanted to ask you, because I didn't explore it with John, but and I know Julian likes Solzhenitsyn. And Solzhenitsyn went into the Gulag an atheist and walked out a Christian. And I'm just curious, and I know that there's been some support from the Pope and that kind of stuff. I'm just curious about, as somebody who went to seminary, what you've seen in terms of Julian's perspective vis-a-vis faith.
Well, I don't think I can put words in his mouth. I can talk a bit about the process I think that we've both experienced through this. And I've seen people, react rather viscerally when for example, when I said that there was the Catholic chaplain in the prison had blessed our wedding and this kind of thing. And people project a lot of things.
Okay, I want to throw in a story because I remember you telling me, and I thought it was great. This, for me, elevated this Catholic chaplain. Was it like you're not allowed to hug, but he kept saying, "Now you can kiss the bride. Now you can hold the bride."
I think we had both the registrar and the chaplain were actually everyone in the room, even the guards, were, I think, quite moved and enthused by the whole situation we're facilitating. I heard John make some comment about how prolonged this kiss was. But I think you can't go through something like this without going through some process of becoming quite spiritual. And I've gone through, I think, a process of understanding the importance of community and human connection. And I think it's something that I'm constantly striving to understand in this kind of trying to make sense of what is happening and how you're supposed to, how you can go forward, when you have this complete cruelty being...
well, let's call it what it is. It's evil.
Well, it's evil. It's evil. And you have to... you have to go through a process. You have to process it, and you have to go through a process to learn how to manage your emotions and your... and understand humanity and how some things are completely... It's also made me think a lot about, justice and and the justice system, which is just like something that floats on top of reality, and then sometimes it activates, sometimes it's denied. But then there's this bigger sense of justice that people have a natural sense of, And then there are some people who are outside of that. And what I can say is that, inside the prison, the structure of the chaplaincy provides a place for humanity, for connection, for in this brutal environment. And so in whatever way I don't know how Julian would describe it, but I know that he's found support within that structure. And so have I.
Well, because it's stripped down to an existential battle. And every time you walk into that prison with your kids, it's the forces of life confronting, in a very palpable sense, the forces of death. I certainly experienced that in war. So palpable that I could feel it. And these are non-rational, they're not irrational, but non-rational forces that go into, I think artists, you come out of an artistic family, deal with it. I think religious thinkers, the best ones, deal with it. But those forces go into making a complete life, and yet we can't measure them. And because of where Julian is, and because of where you are, and because of what you bring, which is really life, sustenance, eros, love. And you bring it into a space where everything is conspiring to crush love and compassion and empathy. That is an existential experience that I think, and I see it in my students in the prison, forces them to begin to ask questions that in a protected environment or, an environment outside of that starkness, you don't ask. And that's why I love Solzhenitsyn. I taught the Gulag Archipelago in the prison last fall, all 3 volumes. And I'm a Nazi. I would quiz them to make sure they did the reading. But that is the Gulag Archipelago. It is about his spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And like Julian, he went into prison with this notoriety and power. He was a captain in the Red Army. He was a brilliant university graduate. And he talks about wearing his officer's coat for the longest time because he couldn't shed himself of that status. And then the last volume is about rebellion and resistance. So I'm not surprised. That, given, working in a prison and knowing what you confront, it is stripped down to the most basic level of human existence. And those of us who fight for life, when we're in war, or when we're in Belmarsh, we see the face of death. We do. And that there are forces, powerful forces that are trying to kill Julian. Yeah. They're trying to kill him. And you're Joan of Arc.
I don't know if we can finish on that note.
Sure, we can.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm going to cry too. So.